Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And I'm glad you're with me today. And today we're going to be looking at Jesus' teaching about the cost of being a disciple. And if you've been following it along the last couple of times, we've been publishing videos every single day. Unfortunately, my wife and I had COVID for the last 4 or 5 days and have not been able to produce these. And so I'm going to be playing catch up. If you're watching these in order, after they've been published, then you didn't get to miss anything. So I'll be catching these up over the next couple of days. But today we're looking at Jesus teaching about the cost of being a disciple. And this comes from Luke 14, verses 25 through 35. And I'll be honest with you, this is one of those things that I do not think we as Christians do a good enough job of talking to people about before they become a Christian. And so I'm going to focus on that side of it a little bit today. But I just wanted to point that out, and because I do think that is part of the reason why we lose a lot of people who become Christians and then walk away from the faith, because they don't understand what the cost is of what they're committing themselves to. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. But starting in verse 25 here, it says, a large crowd had started following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, if you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else, your father, mother, wife, and children, brothers and sisters. Yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. Now, he doesn't literally mean hate. The Greek word here, the way this is translated, means to love less. Right? So you've got to put Christ first. You've got to love him more than your own life. You've got to put him before your own life. And then he goes on to say another two things back to back that was very controversial for them. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. And we're going to talk about what it meant to carry a cross back in that day. So he says in verse 28, but don't begin until you count the cost. And this is what I was talking about before, where I don't think we really cover this section with Christians a lot, or people looking to follow Christ. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and everyone would laugh at you. You've seen that. I mean, any town has that, right? The people who started the construction of a business, or the people who could start a construction of a house, ran out of money halfway through, and then it's just sitting there half finished. That says that they would laugh at you. They would say that person, there's a person that started that building and I couldn't afford to finish it. I'm sure you've experienced that. Or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the 20,000 soldiers marching against him? And if he can't, will he send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while the army is still far away? So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. That verse 33 is important. We have to understand that following Jesus means giving him everything, right? Putting it all in his hands. It's all his now. And so he finishes with 34 and 35 by saying, salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? Flavorless salt is good neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It is thrown away. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. And so he's saying, listen to what I just said to you. So Jesus's audience here was well aware of what it meant to carry one's cross. That means you were going to your death. You were going to die. If you were carrying a cross, you were a dead man walking, in the kind of the terms we use today. When the Romans led a criminal to his execution site, he was forced to carry the cross on which he was going to die. Now, a lot of people, they'll say that in a lot of the pictures we see, it'd be like the whole cross. Typically, it was just the cross beam. They'd have to carry the cross beam across their shoulder that they were going to be hoisted up on the cross with. And so what this did was it showed a submission to Rome and warned observers that they'd better submit to, right? It was a warning to the people in the towns, hey, you better not behave like this guy. And so Jesus made this statement to get the crowds to think about their enthusiasm for him. Like, why were they really following him? Because he did have a lot of people who followed him just for the miracles, for the food, for the things he did, or to see what he was going to say or hear what he was going to say. But there were others in there who were committed to him. So every once in a while, you'll see him turn around or start making these statements. We saw that when he started talking about, the communion and his blood and his body and stuff like that. And so he's doing this to challenging them. And so he's encouraging those who were superficial, right? Either they need to get deeper and they need to turn back. right? If you really didn't want to follow him, if you really weren't committed, if you really weren't committed to carrying a cross for him, then you needed to go. You didn't need to be following him, and that's what he was saying there. He's saying following him was total submission, right? You have to give total submission to him, perhaps even to the point of death, and we saw that in Luke 9 verse 23, right? So when a builder doesn't count the cost, excuse me, I got a little bit of this cough and stuff left over, so I'm just gonna do my best. When a builder doesn't count the cost or estimates it inaccurately, the building is left incomplete. And so, if you don't count the cost of what it's going to, you give up. A lot of people give up because they don't understand what it costs to follow Jesus. And so, when you abandon the Christian life after a little while because you didn't count the cross, you can't say you're committed to Jesus. And so, this I'll say this honestly. I think a big part of this is the responsibility of Christians to non-Christians who are becoming Christians, right? To make sure that they understand what this means. And so, what are those costs? Like, what are the costs that we may run into? And one is, you may lose a social status or wealth. There's a possibility you could do that. You could, especially amongst some of your old friends, right? Or current friends who don't want anything to do with you now. That you may have to give up some control of your money, your time, maybe something to do with your career. You never know what you may face. You may be hated. People may, it depends on your culture, your background, different things like that. There could be separation from the family, or you even put to death. Now, we've talked about this a lot here, but we don't have to really worry about that too much in America today, about being put to death. But there are others who do, and so the thing that we've emphasized on, and I've always emphasized on here, is following Christ, right? Does not mean you're going to have a trouble-free life. And there's a lot of people. They're not saying there's a lot. There's a lot of people out there that kind of teach that, prosperity type theology. You come to Christ, everything's going to be great. Money's going to come pouring in, and all this. And that's not what Jesus says here. So we have to carefully count the cost of becoming Christ's disciples, so that we will firmly hold to our faith. If we don't know what we're walking into and then it gets hard, you can understand why people abandon it. But if you know, hey, there's a possibility this could get really hard walking into it, then you expect that, and so you're able to go through that challenge, and so you won't be as tempted to turn back. And then he gets into this salt, talking about salt. And this is the one time, and I'm going to make a little pun or joke here if you're up with current slang, where we're encouraged to be salty. And so, well, I don't know. Some of you, maybe that's more of a dad joke type thing. But anyways, right? Right? Salt can lose its flavor. I didn't know, if you don't know this, salt can lose its flavor. And when it gets wet and dries out, it's nothing but like a tasteless residue that's left over. So salt can actually lose its flavor, and I don't know how many of you would want to put flavorless salt on any of your food. And what happens is many Christians blend into the world and avoid the cost of standing up for Christ. But Jesus says Christians like that do that, they lose their distinct saltiness, right? That he's using salt as a metaphor there, and they become worthless, right? If you're no different than the world, then you're worthless to him as a disciple. And so just as salt flavors and preserves food, we're to preserve the good in the world and bring new flavor to life, right? And that's to be our job. And this requires planning, willful sacrifice, and unswerving commitment to Christ's kingdom. And so we have to make sure that we are committed to Christ. And if we fail to be, quote, salty, right, what Jesus is calling out here, we fail to represent Christ in the world. And so the final question then is, how salty are you? And so I like those little puns. I'm sorry if that's seems cheesy, but I don't know. I liked it. And so you may have seen the T-shirts that says, something about being salty, right? And uses these verses. And so we're called, right? We're called to be the salt of the earth and to stand out, right? We're called to be his disciple. There's a cost to being his disciple, and it's potentially he's using the words of, you're to put him first above all things, right? You were to love him more than everything else in your life. You're to put him first, put him over everything else in your life, and you're to take up a cross and follow him. Right. And so all those things that's a true commitment. And I don't know if we truly get this. And we don't talk about this enough. And I don't think we like to talk about this enough, especially in what I would call the American version of Christianity here, because if we're being honest, American Christianity is not doing this, right? There's some of us. There's some. I'll admit I'm not doing this the way I should be doing this, and so there's some of us out there. But the true commitment that we see that for being a disciple of Christ is this. This is the blueprint for it, and we don't see it, right? I mean, you can run all the numbers, you can look at all the statistics, you can, it's like 2% of the people who are in claim to be Christians are actually trying to convert people, and so or working to convert people. And so we see all of this. And so I know we don't talk about this enough. I know we don't focus on this enough. And I know we don't make this a priority in our life enough. And I'm not trying to call people out, to name call, or to be extremely negative about anyone. It's just those are the facts. And so we need to, as the church, as Christians, we need to, this needs to be our focus of what does it truly mean to be a disciple? Well, Christ lays it out right here, right? Him first over everything, and take up a cross. What he's saying there is, you better be willing to put me first over everything in your life, and then take up your cross and be prepared to die if you have to. Now, we don't tell very many Christians that, or new converts that, right? Think about that. How many conversations have you had and said, well, when you commit yourself to Christ, yes, you're baptized, you're not just saying a prayer and throwing you in some water, right? What this means is that you are going to put him first over every single thing in your life, and that you're going to take up a cross of his crucifixion, right? And you got to be willing to die for him. Now, how many of us actually have that conversation? Now, it doesn't have to be that blunt, obviously, right? But how many of us have ever had that conversation with someone who's becoming a Christian? And I'm gonna be honest with you. I grew up as a preacher's kid, and I don't remember very often anyone in the church having these type of conversations with someone we're converted. We're talking about how wonderful your life, how Christ, sacrificed himself for you, and he died on the cross for all your sins, and how, you can put your faith and life in him, and it's wonderful. And those are all things that are true, but we don't explain what's on the flip side of that, right? There's a lot of the good things, right? But we don't explain the flip side of that, and I really think we truly need to focus on. Now, I don't mean we don't need to do it in such a way where we just scare the mess out of people and run them all off. But they need to understand that's where that counting the cost comes in. Are you truly willing to do this? Are you truly ready to do what's going to be called to you? And again, I think this is where we get a lot of this, why we focus on a lot of traditional things or a bunch of legalistic stuff that we really don't need to be focusing on. But I think that's why we focus on it, because we think as long as we do these things that make us look like Christians, right? Because we're in a building and we're singing some songs and we're taking communion and doing some things like that, oh, then I'm good. When it's like, it's a whole lot more than that. It's a whole lot more than that. But we think we can focus on that stuff, and it's like, oh, we're good Christians now. It's like, no, that's not what Christianity is. And so this is the cost of being a scribe. And I think we truly need to look at this and go back and study this and get a better understanding of what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And I encourage you to read this over and over. And if you are one of those Christians who are stuck in like the legalistic side of stuff, and think, oh, well, I go through all these steps, so I'm a good Christian, then reread this and understand what, it means to be a true disciple and follower of Christ. As always, I appreciate everyone for watching. If these are helpful, please share them. You can email the links, do all that stuff. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do that. We're going to continue to put out the new studies, and we're going to finish this, and we're actually going to dive into some deeper things of questions of the things that affect everyday life, and as we continue on. But as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.